Today, we're going to talk about a couple issues. We're going to talk about mom and daughter who we've seen and supported through kind of different situations. But I have my friend Mariah here with me, and we are kind of friendly friends because Mariah does health coaching. And I actually remember meeting or seeing her in public. Our birthdays were the same, and we were out to dinner at the same place, not together for our birthdays. And I remember thinking, that lady looks really familiar to me. And then I got home and realized I follow her on Instagram. And then I guess it's probably been like a year or two later, maybe like a year later, you all reached out about working together with your daughter Sophia, and then, eventually worked with you. But I do kind of want to like dive into Sophia's stuff first, Mariah, and just talk through like
Yep.
what she had going on at the time we started working together and like what prompted you all to reach out for care for her.
Yep. So she was full of eczema on her eyelids, her inner elbows, the backs of her knees. I had no idea where it was coming from. Um, but I knew it had to have been gut related, having gone through all my health coaching studies and learning how the gut is just super connected to the rest of the body.
Yeah.
And when I thought back to her previous diagnoses, especially with the C. diff
Hmm.
and the antibiotics she was put on and what that did to her gut, most likely, I just felt like we needed a different approach because we were hitting dead ends everywhere, kind of in the clinical world.
Hmm.
And we did see a GI specialist, but the protocol she wanted her to undergo was not something I wanted to explore.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when we reached out to you and kind of dove deeper into what she had going on and what we could look at and what we could test and kind of uncover for a roadmap to get her healthier.
Hmm. Yeah, and she was a little bit older when she first came to care. I
Yeah.
get asked a lot, do we work with teens? Do you work with preteens? Do you work with like college? Yes, absolutely. And she's kind of in that teeny preteeny area. But you mentioned too her
Hmm.
C. diff experience. She was like 4 or 5 when that happened and
Yeah.
had major issues at that point. And I'm assuming at that point the usual treatment was what you guys were offered of antibiotics. Like, how was the C. diff addressed for her and kind of severity when she was in that 4 or 5 year old age?
So they put her on Flagyl,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very potent but necessary
Mm-hmm.
antibiotic to
Mm-hmm.
combat that virus,
Mm-hmm.
or not virus, but um,
Bacteria.
and we retested her and they said it was still positive. So they put her on a second dose
Mm-hmm.
right on top of her first dose. So she was on it for 20 straight days.
Mm-hmm.
And it was after that that we started noticing she was just chronically sick. Every year she would pick up every cootie known to man. She would get strep every single year more than once. She
Mm-hmm.
would get flu. I mean, she would miss so much school. It was unbelievable, which also is what led me to you to see what was going on with her because
Yeah.
I'm like, why is my child always fighting some sort of an illness?
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted better answers. We didn't just want to treat her symptoms. We wanted to figure out what's going on here. How do we get down to the root cause
Yeah.
and treat that and heal her from the root cause to not have the symptoms return
Yeah. And
versus just a
from
band-aid.
my perspective, Sophia came in with eczema presenting, but when we move into history and we start to hear like, okay, there's this T. diff, there's kind of the chronic sickness stuff. She's
Mm-hmm.
always with a little bit of streppy stuff. That starts to paint a picture for me
Mm-hmm.
that like, hey, this is an immune system that is not online completely, and that Th1 killer side is not doing its job. So we need to pick that up and see maybe what's there kind of interfering. And we started with the GI map, and it really kind of matched up pretty great to what we were talking through. Her beneficial bacteria,
Yeah.
so the good ones were low, which can come from a variety. I mean, if we've not had good bacterial exposure in our early years, that can happen if mom was on antibiotics in delivery. If we had a C-section, mom's going to be on antibiotics. That early establishment of the microbiome can be altered, but also it can be altered if we've had to have heavy antibiotics in those early formative years under age 6 or so when the microbiome is really like developing those good bacterial colonies. So she had low beneficials. There was some like low level candida on her stool test, some strep and some staph. But the part I think that was interesting was just the low immunity. Her gut immunity, her
Yeah.
secretory IgA was very low. And so that kind of lined up with what you guys were experiencing with her, where like she would just kind of pick things up and she would have a course of whatever it was and then it would move on. But there was always a little something. Um, and so we used that info and moved into kind of a protocol that had multiple layers for her. What was that like for Sophia to work through a protocol? Because we think about teens and preteens and swallowing
hmm
pills and things like what was it like for
hmm
her to get that done?
I think she was so eager to get rid of her symptoms that she didn't care at that point. She was willing to do anything.
Yeah.
And she knew, we had open conversations about it because it's her self. I
Mhm.
wanted her to understand what we were doing. And she was fine with taking the supplements. She would it was hard at first. I'm not going to act like it was perfectly fine from the get-go, but
Mhm.
she worked at it to the point that, she's absolutely comfortable taking supplements now. It doesn't even matter the size really. Um, but the nutrition piece was the piece I was mostly concerned about, not because it was a drastic shift for us,
Mhm.
just because of her age and her peers and having to say no to certain things because, she's an athlete and she's a teen, in school with her friends and at birthday
Mhm.
parties and having to say no to certain things or bring her own things to have. But
Mhm.
she was super dedicated to sticking to the protocol to try to get rid of the problem.
Yeah.
And she really did a great job because I'm pretty sure we tackled gluten, dairy, and sugar for her
Yeah. I think that would be
all at
right
once.
if I know how I
Yep.
write protocols. Yeah. So those things were kind
Yep.
of changes for her because we really had to kind of cut back that candida
Yeah.
load. And I do think
Yeah.
I remember her too being seeing response relatively quickly. I think that is a good
hmm
thing with teens. Like they're pretty honest.
hmm
Like if they feel better, they're like, okay, something's happening. I'll try
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
suggestions. But she's a little
Yeah.
easier than that. And I think that
Yeah.
helped to kind of like fortify the effort and get things clear for her. And yeah, like I said at the beginning, like with you health coaching, like I've seen food journals for you, for her. Like, I know that things over there are pretty spick and span. You guys eat a lot of veggies, a lot of quality meat,
Right.
like all those things are
Yeah.
there. But still, when that immune system is kind of hijacked, if you will, where she didn't have a strong killer side, not a good beneficial population, you can kind of see that cyclical
Right.
illness, the little eczema, candida, things like that. So,
Yeah. She
uh,
definitely needed more support in her gut.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So I
yeah,
think that really helped because she
yeah.
wasn't she wasn't supplementing in any way
Mm-hmm.
prior to us working with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she
So I
was.
feel like a lot of what she was eating wasn't serving her well given her situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really apt thing that what she was eating was not serving her well, given her situation. People
Yeah.
ask all the time, I have to
Yeah.
quit this, will I have to quit that? Will I not be able to eat these things forever? Modifying diet is for a season for a reason in my mind.
Yeah.
And also it really
100%.
depends on all the things. Like she could have had her GI map come back with good beneficials and just an overgrowth of strep and staph, and we would address that differently than if she,
Mhm.
than where she was, where she had not very many good bacteria. We had to kind of all parts of test results are important, and then all parts of the client's clinical symptom picture are important. If I'd never heard the C. diff thing from early in her life, I wouldn't have thought about her case the same. I wouldn't have considered her immunity in the same way. So that's kind of the beauty, I know that you know, of working from a root cause approach and that we have time. Whereas your traditional doctor,
Mhm.
you go in and you're like, we have eczema, and there's like, here's your steroid cream. come
And
back if
that's
you do
exactly
this
what we were
again.
given. Yeah. When we
Yeah.
saw her dermatologist, she's like, here's this topical steroid cream
Mm-hmm.
and off you
Mm-hmm.
go.
But it's an
And
inside job. There's
yeah, it is
more parts.
100% an inside job. Yep.
And also, steroids interact with the immune system if we get down to it. And so, why do steroids help sometimes for a little while? Because they are addressing the immune component. And I think that part of eczema is really important because the way we resolve eczema is to resolve the immune system's relationship with the pathogens that are creating eczema. So, kind of same thinking,
Right.
but a more thorough, complete approach, if you will. But, um,
Yep.
I just love Sophia's case because it is kind of straightforward in a way that like testing really matched her history. It really lined up with what she'd been through, and then getting a teen to follow through, like she really did follow through great, and those changes made a difference for her. And it
Hmm.
really wasn't. I look back at her calls like we really only did a handful. There were like three that we worked through and kind of got some really good solving progress for her. And I think
Yeah.
too, I hope that she felt like she learned some things in that process too. Like we're always trying to educate and help teach the why so that
Yeah.
when you're gone from care, you can know how to continue caring for yourself. Or with teens, if they have more info and it's logical to them, there's a lot more buy-in, or the payoff's going
Yeah.
to be good. And I think too with teens and skin stuff, it's such a big thing. Like it's such a big motivator. A lot of times parents think their kids aren't going to participate, but we have girls all the time who like can't wear shorts, they're wearing long sleeves in summer because their skin's just covered everywhere. It's uncomfortable,
Hmm.
but also they find it
She did
unsafe.
that.
Yeah.
She was so afraid to wear short sleeves because she didn't want people to see, even after the eczema had gone, she didn't want people to see the discoloration in her
Mm.
elbow,
Mm-hmm.
um, from where the eczema lived for so long
Yeah.
and then healed. It kind of left a discoloration that
Mm-hmm.
has since gone away. But
Mm-hmm.
um, to your point about kids, though, the way they respond, I just want to also say that it was wild to me how supportive other people were.
Oh, I love
Like
that.
when I would share that this is what she's going through and she can't have these things, when she would go to gymnastics and somebody would be celebrating a birthday, they would bring her in
Mm-hmm.
her own special treat along
Yeah.
with everybody else's. So she felt included.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times parents are maybe a little hesitant to explore these types of options because it's going to be harder, not necessarily, but they think it might be harder for them out in the
Yeah.
real world.
Yeah.
When if you just if you're just open and honest with the people that you're surrounded by, more often than not, they're going to be supportive also and
Yeah.
help your child through the process,
Especially if
which
you
was such a
equip them
blessing.
with how. Yeah, because people do want to help,
Yes.
but I think the big issue is they don't
Yes.
know, they're not familiar,
Exactly.
and it doesn't
Yeah.
take a whole lot. But yeah, that is a huge key.
Yeah.
And even little tiny kids going to preschool, like they want to have the same snacks as their friends. So we teach
Hmm.
mom and dad, like, here are some subs for those things, have them at school in a little basket, and the teacher can grab whatever's like their peers' food that they're having. And then we're back to kind of normalcy, but that normalizing piece, that's a really good point in like kind of the community part,
Yeah.
which can
Yeah.
be touch and go with
Tricky.
teens because sometimes they
Yeah.
don't want anybody to know, but also
Yep. Yep.
something gymnastics, like that's who she's with all the time and it's
Yep.
important and everybody has different things. So yeah, that's really good and helpful. Thanks for sharing that part. But I
Yeah.
do want to kind of move to like when we started seeing you, you came and were like, hey, having gut issues, thyroid issues, weight imbalance issues. That was really what you came in with. And then when we started to
Hmm.
kind of go through history again, we kind of uncovered some things for you. So let's just like walk through, um, yeah, like where you were when you came in, maybe some history pieces that you find key, and we'll kind of go from there.
Okay. So after working with you with Sophia, um, just started asking myself these questions like, I wonder how related her gut issues are to mine.
Mm,
Because I do have a history of intolerances that led me to a lot of discomfort in my gut.
mm,
Um, And my doctor back in 2019 did suggest going grain free to see if it helped, and it 100% did.
Mm-hmm.
But I did notice that there were other things that started evolving from there
Yeah.
that were still triggering discomfort in my GI.
Mm.
And I was starting to gain weight. I was bloated. I was gassy. I was super fatigued.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a history of thyroid, so I knew that could be a possibility. Had my panels checked, they were normal.
Mm.
Um, and I just wanted deeper answers
Mm-hmm.
um, beyond the thyroid panels. And I know in conventional medicine, their panels are much wider than in the functional world where it's a more narrow range. So you're more likely going to be outside of normal in the functional world versus
Mm-hmm.
the clinical world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and going back to the thyroid piece and spending so much time outside and wondering if we had been bit by a tick somewhere along the way. And
Mm-hmm.
um, there was just a lot to unpack that I wasn't getting from any doctor that I had seen.
Yeah.
So that's when I came to you, and I think I want to do a GI map test. And then
Mm-hmm.
I think we did that first, and then we moved into the tick-borne illness.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, like we talked through, you're kind of having some thyroid. You don't have a thyroid, so maybe we start there, right? A long time ago, that
Yeah.
was you went through
Yeah.
radioactive treatment and
Yes.
thyroidism issues started for you when you were very small, kind of an
Yes.
onset at 10. You'd had maybe you tell me about it because there was like so much that happened then, and there were
There's a lot
diagnoses
there.
that came along with it. And I do
Yeah.
wonder if that was kind of the first exposure of tick-borne
Yeah.
stuff potentially, because it is a very it kind of matches how the body can cascade. But what
Mhm.
was going on at 10 when the hyperthyroidism piece came in for you?
So it was pretty tricky to get that diagnosis. My mom noticed that I was gorging myself with food, but I was losing weight at a ridiculous speed.
Mm,
I was very hyperactive. I couldn't sit still in class. I couldn't focus. And she took me to the doctor. They wanted to diagnose me with I think it was ADHD and
hmm
then diabetes.
hmm
And she just felt like that wasn't right. So she just kept pursuing. And then we finally found a pediatric endocrinologist. And
hmm
he determined that I, in fact, have like an extreme case of hyperthyroidism and Graves' disease,
hmm
and said that had 2 more weeks gone on, I probably would not have made it.
hmm hmm
So they put me on a slew of medications. If my memory serves me correctly, I think I was on like 14 pills a day
hmm
just to try
hmm
to get everything to calm down. I mean, my
Yeah.
body was attacking itself.
hmm
And that's kind of just the way I lived for a long while until I got to high school.
hmm
And then it was kind of like this ping pong of like hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism. Um, so the prescriptions always fluctuated and changed. And then I got married. So now we're at my late 20s.
hmm
And I was not on any thyroid meds at the time.
hmm
But when I look back at that, I was so thin when I got married.
Yeah.
And I could tell one of my eyes in my wedding pictures, one eye was a lot wider than the
hmm
other. Like you could see
hmm
the whites around my entire eye. And from doing, some further studying about that, that's a clear indication of Graves' disease.
hmm hmm
So, 2 months after I got married, I got pregnant with my son, and they put me on a specific medication for my thyroid that was safer for pregnancies.
hmm
Had my son, immediately got pregnant with my daughter. She kicked me into hypothyroidism. I had her, then I became allergic to the medication.
hmm
And at that point in my early 30s, I had it. And I felt broken and like something was wrong with me. I thought my thyroid was, I was just born with a bad thyroid because it was never explained to me what the gland is, what it does, how it
Yeah.
can be affected.
Yeah.
So I just thought it's faulty. And the only option I had was either to stay on medication that I was allergic to
Mm-hmm.
or take it out.
Yeah.
And then I was given the decision, do we surgically remove it or do we take radioactive iodine?
Mm-hmm.
And so I did the radioactive iodine and it dissolved the majority of my thyroid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and
And
that
I
was
think
31,
mhm.
2. Yeah.
I think that story's telling too, because you can look at it. We think about immune triggers. Pregnancy is one, and you can see a shift in the thyroid when you got pregnant.
Mm,
And then we see a shift again after Sophia,
hmm.
and even a shift in the immune system after Sophia, where that medication that you've been taking and was fine for your first
Yeah.
pregnancy and afterwards, all that was fine. And then all of a sudden, now we're having this kind of allergic reaction response. There's
Yeah.
another immune shift, if you will, that's pregnancy related. But I do think an important kind of like note in all of this too is when you grew up going to Maine in the summers. And when we
Mm,
start to piece the story together later, Lyme is a part of one of your root causes. And so it's interesting to me there too that that's like a Lyme endemic area. One of my favorite doctors I've learned a lot from has, I think, acquired so much information because he's had so much opportunity to, because there's so many folks there who have recurrent bites and it's just very, very prevalent.
hmm.
So that was a clue for me when we were talking through health history too, is that there's definitely immune triggers here going on. The thyroid's a big part of your issues, which I could have taken your intake and said, okay, well, gut, thyroid, and weight imbalance, that can all just be thyroid for sure. But when we pulled out those kind of allergic pieces and the pregnancy trigger part,
Yeah.
then it started to kind of show more through. And you mentioned too the bacterial pneumonia episode. Tell me about that and how that had played out in your past.
Oh, yeah. So we moved to Kentucky 10 years ago,
Mhm.
and I want to say it was 6 years ago. I think it was 2018,
That's what I had.
maybe sooner than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I just got, I just didn't feel great one day. And I didn't know, is this strep again? Because, like we talked about earlier, I just had this reoccurring strep infection, just like my daughter, every year, at least twice a year.
Hmm.
Um, and I just remember thinking, I bet it's just strep again. So I was kind of fighting through it. And I remember being in my kitchen and just thinking, oh my gosh, I have the worst headache. It is relentless. It will not stop. I went to bed that night. I could not sleep. Um, and I just woke up my husband and said, something's just not right. I need to go to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to the hospital and they did x-rays and said, yes, you have bacterial pneumonia. Um, and put me on an antibiotic.
Hmm.
And I was there for 4 days.
Hmm.
And that scared me. I have
Yeah.
a pretty high pain tolerance because I had both kids without drugs.
Hmm.
And that was something.
Mm-hmm. So
So
another
I've
bacterial
constantly,
challenge.
yeah, just
Hmm.
constant every season there's just a constant fight in my body. Just there's a war going on between all these things I'm exposed to and my immune system that's trying so hard but struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked through a lot of those kind of your sickness things, all kind of, we're always on the bacterial side. A lot of times the body will bend one way or
Hmm.
the other, and your issues were always strepy, the bacterial pneumonia,
Hmm.
even, the recurrent part of the strep as an adult was an interesting piece too. But when we started working through symptom load, when I was kind of like trying to investigate, okay, like who's the root? Where's this coming from? Is Lyme potentially a factor? You shared that you'd always kind of had arthritis in shoulder and knee joints, but you'd also had
Hmm.
injuries in the past. So it's so easy to
Hmm.
look at those. And I also, like, it could absolutely be from injuries. But you mentioned like you absolutely could not sit like crisscross applesauce, like your joints not
Yeah.
cooperate to do that business.
Yeah.
Sugar, we go through food reaction kind of things, and you mentioned sugar creates heart palpitations. Well, that's a ding, ding, ding for me because
Yeah.
that can be something sugar feeds bacteria. So then we think, okay, well, what bacteria can be connected to heart kind of things?
Hmm.
You mentioned too, like lower back pain and ache was just like a
Hmm.
constant thing. And I know you to be someone who's like regularly strength training, regularly exercising. Like if I think of my friends who are like top discipline with that kind of stuff, like you're in top three. Like it's a constant. There were no questions for me like, okay, well maybe she doesn't take care of herself. Okay, maybe this is left over from having babies and not getting strong yet. None of those things were true for you. You really did take
Right.
good care of your body. You eat really well, all those things. And when we started working together at that point too, you'd said, okay, like there's a lot more fatigue than there's been. I haven't worked out in 10 days, which that's like a big red flag because that's not your normal at all. But it was really
Right.
like interfering with life, and you were having middle of the night waking, and you'd
Yep.
started to kind of notice some correlations too between like wine and symptoms, like when you would have your clenching and jaw
TMJ.
pain.
Yeah.
Yes, but when you would pull that out, it would kind of go away. So again, to me,
Yep.
I'm thinking, huh, that sounds like alcohol feeding some bacterial something like Bartonella that can interfere with jaw stuff. So all of
Yep.
those things were kind of matching, and I think I threw to you, okay, we've looked at blood work, we've looked at a GI map, and your GI map wasn't wildly
It wasn't
eventful.
crazy. Yeah.
Very similar to
Hmm.
Sophia's in that, strep was there. Um, there was like
Candida.
some low beneficials, a little candida, and your immune was really like kind of run of the mill. I wouldn't call it weak. There wasn't a lot there bacterially, so we moved into looking at the full pathogens panel, and even there wasn't a ton on paper, which I think this is such a good example of when we're looking at Lyme and Co's, testing doesn't always solve it. Sometimes we
Right.
have to kind of pair, it's always a full picture of symptom load and testing. So we kind of did too a little different strategy. We looked at Lyme, and there were some markers, but you weren't necessarily like CDC Lyme diagnostic. It was definitely there. And we looked at some individual titers of like Mycoplasma, Epstein-Barr.
Hmm.
Those were raging. And we
Yep.
pieced together too, you'd had plenty of strep. There was strep in your gut. So that was something we addressed. And the jaw pain, back pain, joint pain in the way that it was, we brought in Bartonella, and you worked through immune therapy for all of those. But what was that process like for you? What things came up? How did it feel? How did it feel over time even?
I'd say my first response to the whole process was relief
Mm,
because I finally had an answer other than your thyroid labs are fine.
mm, yeah.
So it was a new territory to explore to try to get myself to feeling better. So
Hmm.
I was excited, and I was also very eager to get the ball rolling.
Hmm.
Um, and I knew the process was going to be challenging, but time passes either way. And
Yeah.
I just figured I'm just going to do this because what's
Hmm.
the alternative? The
Hmm.
alternative is an option I don't even want to entertain. So we're
Hmm.
just going to do this.
Hmm.
Um, and, I just spoke openly about it with my family, and everybody was very supportive. And
Hmm.
I said, I know I'm going to have probably a higher symptom load at the beginning
Hmm.
as we reintroduce stuff to work through the immune process, the immune therapy. But there's light at the end of the tunnel, and we're going to get there. So
Hmm.
it was it was hard at times,
Hmm.
like in a challenging way, just to kind of get through the day, just
Hmm.
with all the symptoms. But if I just kept my mind focused on why I was doing it and that it's going to be fine, um, that's exactly what happened.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
we got through it, and it wasn't hard,
Hmm.
but there were moments where it was a little challenging just from symptoms.
Yeah. And symptoms,
But
I think a lot of what I heard was just the kind of the achy fatigue,
yeah,
headaches here and there, sinus
irritability.
irritable.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah,
Bartonella can make you really irritable.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there were little like odd skin things, kind of
yes,
barrier stuff like cracks on your like nostrils and some skin
yes,
things. But I think energy maybe was probably like a core theme, if you will, and then kind of like
yeah,
those achy flu feels. But also pretty early on when we would meet, you would be like, okay, that day did suck and I was on the couch, but then I had a day of like really good energy and that was good, but then it wasn't very, very long.
yeah,
So there's definitely like that like
up
ebb
and
and
down.
flow piece. Yeah, you
Yeah.
totally
Yeah.
get that. And
And
sleep
the
is
energy
something.
piece, I think, was probably the hardest for me just because I'm such a high energy person.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was probably the most frustrating part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm not one to just sit around. I'm
Yeah.
just a goer, a doer. I'm always on the move.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I needed to let my body rest and heal.
Mm-hmm.
So that was probably the most challenging part. But again, I knew I was going to get through it and come out on the
Yeah.
other end.
Yeah.
So
And you did a really good job yielding because, like I said, you're definitely like exercise is a regular for you. And we all know like it can really be like a great stress reliever and a good
yeah,
positive like routine kind of thing that when that's part of your life and you can't do it, it can be super frustrating. But you were great at
yeah,
yielding to me saying like, hey, that's probably too much right now. We need to like back off a little bit.
yeah,
Let's try this more chill version. Let's like not,
yeah,
do that. And I think that part also helped you kind of like move out of that first couple months and get some good days sooner because you did yield to the rest piece,
yeah.
but it is hard for sure. Um, Anything
And I
else that
try
you,
to still incorporate some movement. I would walk every day.
yeah.
Um, I would do like gentle yoga,
Hmm.
always sitting outside,
Hmm.
in the morning sun as much as I could, just to try to
Hmm.
help give my body what it needed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you were easy to work for because I could give you like a gentle reminder, like, hey, we need a little circadian support. And you're like, I'm on it. I'm doing it. I'm doing a little more. I'm be outside. I'm having my coffee outside, my breakfast outside. I'm good to go. And that's really, really helpful too. There were some weird things too. I think you kind of had some like limited taste and smell here and there. And just like
Yes. Or like the
sinus stuff for
cigarette
you was
smell.
like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. The
Sometimes,
cigarette smell was so bizarre.
yeah.
So bizarre.
The smell taste stuff is interesting with Lyme. You can have like odd things like that. Like a lot of times people have like a metallic taste in their mouth, or for
Hmm.
some it'll be more like you're eating something and the first two bites are great, and then the third bite tastes like mold really intensely, and you're like, well, this is just the other half of the apple. Nothing has changed food wise, but you can have taste and
Yeah.
smell modifications really quickly. But that was something that kind of like ebb and flowed. And like, I think coffee for a little while had no smell or taste for you randomly.
Yeah.
Then that kind of
Yeah.
circled
Like
back
everything,
through.
which was frustrating because I'm a huge foodie. Like
Yeah.
I love to cook and I love to eat. Like it is a passion of mine. And I
Yeah.
was robbed. I
Yeah.
was just robbed of being able to smell or taste anything.
Yeah. But those things are
Oh,
back now.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Yep.
just a short-lived thing. Yeah, yeah. Sleep was
Sure
another
was.
thing for you. That was a big issue. Tell me more about
Sleep was
that.
awful.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. I always could fall asleep. I could
Hmm.
never stay asleep.
Hmm.
Um, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, like clockwork, every night I would wake up and I would just toss and turn. Like my body felt anxious and restless.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I couldn't go back to sleep because I couldn't, I don't know. I don't even know why. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
And that affected me because I mean, sleep is a huge
Hmm.
component to our health. And if we have
Oh my
broken
gosh.
sleep, then the day is just not going to go great.
Yeah.
Um, that was hard. Yeah,
Yeah.
the sleep disruption, that was hard,
And with
but
Lyme,
it's
we
gone.
often,
I
yeah,
sleep it great.
that's good. And we often see that early morning
Yeah.
waking with Lyme, and then we can see blood sugar affected. Some people will wake multiple times a
Oh,
night, and other people have
yeah.
a really hard time calming down in the evening to go to sleep. But the sleep dysregulation
Mm-hmm.
is a classic Lyme symptom.
Mm-hmm.
And I think towards the end, really, things just kind of kept peeling off for you. Like you would mention kind of midway, like, okay, I had a glass of wine. That was a terrible idea. I felt horrendous. And then later on, you're like, I was able to go and have a little of some things. Now I'm eating dairy. That's not bothering me anymore.
Yep.
Motivation, energy stuff kind of creeped in over time too.
Oh,
Um,
the energy piece has been monumental.
mm, you feel
Working
different
out
now.
again,
Yeah.
it just, I can work out and I can smell and taste my food. All is right in the world.
Those are big wins. Those are
Those
like
are huge.
foundational human
I
things.
know. I
Like,
know.
can't have those taken away. But it is interesting how, like, at the beginning of things, like you didn't feel your best, but someone observing you from the outside would be like, I don't know, she looks great. Like, she seems
Yeah.
fine. Like, she's vivacious. She's living life, doing all the things.
Well, right. And that's exactly what my endocrinologist said to me. She
Mm-hmm.
said, your labs are fine. And she looked me up and down and said, you look great. You look
Yeah.
better than most. Just go buy new clothes.
Yeah. And you were like, oh, maybe not, because this is a little
I was
bizarre
like,
for me.
that's your professional opinion. Fantastic. We're going to move on.
Yeah, yeah. But also
So,
there's more under there, and sometimes it takes
yeah,
thinking about things differently from a different perspective to kind of to find
100%
out
yes.
more. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I think you shared one thing about Sophia, like a way someone cared for you all well, but in your own personal walk through figuring out pathogen stuff in Lyme and immune therapy, what was something that anyone did to care well for you or your family while you were walking through the chronic illness journey?
they just extended me such a tremendous amount of grace.
Mm.
I mean, and stepped up to the plate and helped out where I
Hmm.
was lacking, where I would normally just take
Hmm.
over and take charge and, go in mom mode.
Hmm.
Um, my husband really stepped it up, helped out around the house. So did the kids. I remember one time I was frustrated and irritable, and
Hmm.
I kind of snapped at my daughter, and she looked at me and she goes, Mom, it's okay. I'm not mad at you because I know that you're going through immune therapy and you can be irritable.
Hmm. Oh,
I just
bless
thought it was
her.
the cutest thing ever. And I was
That's
like,
sweet.
you're right, but it's not okay.
You're right, but I won't do it again, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
So just they were super supportive. And so were you and your team. Like
Mm.
just so good at explaining things and helping me walk through the process
Mm.
and making me feel like I wasn't crazy
Yeah,
and always there whenever I had questions. You were just always super supportive.
good. I love
And
to hear
people need
that.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you really need that after you go through traditional spaces that should be helpful to you. Like it kind of
Sure.
creates this weird trust not trust situation when
Mm,
providers haven't either been able to help you because it's not something they can legitimately help with, or when they haven't put forth what I would consider fair effort to help or
right.
respond to testing requests or things like that.
Right.
It is really refreshing to have support, and to have time with the provider who can explain. And it's really why I moved into this space myself. When I went through my original health journey, I had the same, like where you just get looked at and you're like, you look fine. It's
Right.
probably just postpartum stuff. And like,
Which is
okay,
so
but
dismissive.
it is. It is so dismissive. And it doesn't recognize or honor that each human has their own intuition and their own brain.
Right.
Just because I say this all the time to clients when I'm like, this is what I think. If you think I'm wrong, let's talk about it. Because I've
Yeah.
been wrong before, but that is not always the vibe that happens when we get
Right.
to the traditional medical.
Yeah. I
Um,
think too that we know ourselves better than anyone else. And
mhm,
so
mhm,
if we can be honest with what we're going through and with the person that's caring for us, and you have to have that trusting relationship.
mhm.
I think that's such a key part to it too. Like
Yeah.
just because somebody has MD after their name doesn't mean they know your body better than you.
Hmm.
So I think advocating for ourselves is a huge part of it.
I think too, you did a great job of kind of saying early on, like, I know something's off. I'm not receiving help. I just kind of feel like we need to walk through whatever you think I need to walk through, and this is where I kind of need to be.
Mhm.
And that, like, that intuition that we all have is there. And I see it in kids where they're like drawn to foods that their body needs, where they're nutritionally deficient, and
Mhm.
they're not interested in eating something that makes them feel bad. And the same with adults. We're like drawn to this form of exercise, or we're really interested in going to the sauna because our body needs to clear stuff. Like there's these
Right.
things, and the same can be true of kind of being drawn to particular care method or provider, all those things are true too. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think that honoring your, like trusting yourself, knowing
Yeah.
like I know myself better than
Yeah.
any other, you're with yourself all the time, no one else is.
Right.
but
Yeah.
it's really
No
important.
one knows you better than yourself.
And it's so easy to gaslight ourselves too after we've gone to the doctor and been like, this, and this happened. And they're like, you look fine, you look great. Then you're like, is it really that bad? Like,
Right.
maybe it's not, but it's important to kind of honor those things. And
Right. Or these are just the cards I was dealt. I guess I just have to deal with my symptoms.
yeah, even with some of your like arthritis-y stuff, right? Thinking about like
Yeah.
symptoms for you, like you legitimately had injuries to the places where you had the most body pain, but also Lyme was definitely playing a part in that body
Right.
kind of arthritis stuff. So it's easy for us to like create healthy coping mechanisms and messages to ourselves around our symptom load, but sometimes when they're all strung together, they
Hmm.
paint a different picture, and that's important. And I think you were
Yeah.
really open too. Sometimes
Oh, yeah.
that is so important when I'm having to really convince. That can be hard, but that
I
part I
feel
think
like if
served you
you're,
well.
it just makes the process a lot easier
Hmm.
to go through when you're just open and honest and willing to just participate, you know?
Yeah, and I think the whole basis of a functional approach is curiosity. Like
Yeah.
I try to go into every clarity call. I am by nature like curiosity killed the cat. That's me. Like I'm just so curious about whatever.
Yeah.
But
And you
that
have
is
to ask
really,
questions to
yeah.
figure things out. You know, you're
Yeah.
solving a mystery. We
Mm-hmm.
can't see inside the body when we're just
Mm-hmm.
having a conversation. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that curiosity is really important. Well, I really appreciate you
Hmm.
sharing about Sophia's journey and yours, and I
Hmm.
hope it's helpful to kind of help other people see themselves
Yeah.
in symptom load and to kind of know that you don't have to live forever with a host of random things. Sometimes
Yes.
random things add up to a very normal thing if you're in the right place looking for solutions.
Yes. I couldn't agree more.
All right. Well, thanks for being with me.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.